Well, I am happy to introduce Marilee Mason, who is the founder and president of New Heart of Texas Ministries, and she founded that in 2013, but she's been facilitating Rachel's Vineyards retreat since 2006, correct? And so she has her own personal story of recovery and healing through a Rachel Vineyards retreat, and I know that she's going to be sharing that probably at some point, but she's going to introduce our speaker to us, and so I just asked Mary to come on up and do that.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I'm so excited to have such a great turnout, and you all are in for a treat this next day and a half. I'm not going to introduce Dr. Teresa Burke yet. I want to tell you a little bit about New Heart Ministries. New Heart of Texas, we do our mission is to help anyone who's suffered from traumatic events like abuse or abortion. And through New Heart, we facilitate Rachel's Vineyard and Grief to Grace. And you're going to hear more about those recovery retreats with Teresa. But before I introduce Teresa and we start this day, we thought it was best that you hear just two testimonies. I'm not going to share mine today. A lot of you have already heard mine. But I have two ladies who have experienced healing from traumatic events. And once you hear their testimonies, then when Teresa's teaching about the different trauma, it's going to make sense. So we thought that we would open up with testimonies first. So I'm going to introduce Chris Winsett, if you would mind coming up. Chris went through one of our retreats in 2012, and she has offered to share her testimony with you this morning. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, you can. I don't know. Is this mic working? Okay. You have to hold it. Sorry.
That's okay. I need something to lean on, or I just might fall over. So I got this call last night from my dear sister in Christ, Tracy, on my way home from church, and asking me if I would share today. So I'm in the car, I'm all alone, and very peacefully I said, yeah, I can do that. And I think I probably stunned Tracy, because those of you that know me know I typically say no before I say yes. But for whatever reason, I said yes. And so I got home, and I started thinking, well, okay, what am I going to say here? What am I going to say? And I thought, gosh, Lord, just speak from your heart. Speak from your heart. Just tell your story. That's all you have to do. It's my story, and it's easy to share. So then all of a sudden a light bulb went off in a little God wink that I get frequently. And I started thinking about my morning devotion. My morning devotion, the title of it was, Have You Forgotten How to Dream? And the scripture was Jeremiah 1:5. Before I made you in my mother's womb, I chose you. Before you were born, I set you apart for a special work. So the woman that wrote this devotion, she was a table leader, and she had to raise a question to the gals. And the question she had to raise was, what God-inspired dreams do you have in your heart today? And on that note, everybody's head went down, and everybody's fiddling with their papers, no eye contact. And so she thought, well, this isn't working. I'm going to have to reword this. So she said, what would you do for God if you knew you wouldn't fail? And so I always, with my devotions, I try to put myself in that devotion. And so I was thinking to myself, what would I do? What would I do for God if I knew I wouldn't fail? And I thought of two things. One of the things I'll share today, but the other one I'm not going to. But the first one I thought of was, I really want to share my testimony more than one-on-one with a larger group of women so they can see what God has done in my life. So here I am 24 hours later sharing with you a group of women. It is amazing. And one of the other things she said in that testimony, which I think just struck me, when God gives us a dream, it's not for selfish reasons. It's for kingdom reasons. And he has uniquely wired us to be able to fulfill that dream with his help. I know he is with me today. Because I know God's word will never come back empty without accomplishing what he desires. So my story, my husband Rick, who unfortunately could not be here today, he was supposed to be here and work just kind of got in the way. So I apologize that he's not here with me. But we have been married 35 years, and it was a year before we got married that we found out we were pregnant. And we immediately, shame hit us. What are people going to think? We kind of got the cart before the horse, as everybody used to say. And on that basis, our fear took over our heart. And we immediately made the decision to abort our firstborn. I wish I could go back. If I knew what I knew now, we would never have done that. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what fell. But anyway, that after we did that, that began 32 years of total silence. Not sharing that with anybody, keeping it to ourselves. Not even talking about it between the two of us. Neither one of us ever brought it up. 20 plus years later, God was starting to nudge me. I went on an Emmaus walk, and that was the very first time that I had written it on a piece of paper that I had an abortion. I wrote it on a little piece of paper. And it was called Dying Moments, if any of you have ever been on an Emmaus walk. And during those dying moments, I put that on a piece of paper, and I put it at the foot of the cross, and it was all burned. It was buried. But it never came out to anybody on that retreat. Did I ever share what I had written on that piece of paper? It was still buried inside. And so for 8 to 10 years, God just kept working on me and working on me. And yes, I'm stubborn, and it took that long for him to come to me face to face. So I'm journaling. I'm hearing reasons why the walls need to come down. And then all of a sudden, years go by, and we're empty nesters. I may have said that. We were empty nesters. I had more time to think. And my husband was asked to transfer here to Texas. That was from West Virginia. And on that note, we said, no way are we going to Texas. So we stalled for a year. As you can see, we're here. We stalled for a year, and it came up again. And so we began to think this is where God had us. And ironically, because we were so torn with this move, my husband met with with our pastor and just shared with him, that we felt we were being called here, and no, we didn't want to leave, but we're going. And it was interesting, now that we look back, our pastor at the time said to Rick, and I wasn't a part of that meeting. It was part of the men's group that Rick was a part of. And our pastor at that time said, Rick, I think you and Chris are being called out there for a ministry. Little did we know. So within 6 months of being here in Texas, I found myself in a Bible study with a group of women. And one of the women was sharing about Rachel's Vineyard. And there were a number of women in a circle. And she shared the statistic, 1 in 3 women have had an abortion. And looked around the room and said, ladies, there's a lot of women in here. 1 in 3 women. And that's where I was totally convicted. I knew at that moment that I was going to Rachel's Vineyard. I knew this was the time. This was the time God had for me. So 2 months later, I went to Rachel's Vineyard. Um, all I can say is it was a total transformation. If you'd have told me I'd be up here talking about my abortion 3 years ago, I would say no way. Nobody even knew. Rachel's Vineyard was amazing. Beautiful experience of redemption. Finally, we acknowledged we have a son. We honored him. We memorialized him. We named him Daniel. And I know now I have a son in heaven. And the beautiful part of that is during our retreat, Rick and I both went together. And during our retreat, God kind of gave Rick that vision that it was a son. And so therein lies the name Daniel. And as I said, Rick and I went together. We were one of the first couples to go on a Rachel's Vineyard. And from what I understand, it took a lot of prayer in order to let that happen through Mary Lee and her team. Wasn't common for couples to go, but for whatever reason we were approved, and it was the way it was supposed to be. So I'm free, I'm forgiven, I'm redeemed. We began to share. We share with our pastor. We share with our daughters. One of the first things we did, share with our best friends. And Sue's here with me today to support me. And in all of that sharing, every single time, almost every time, all we've gotten is grace and forgiveness. We've received grace and forgiveness. And every time we've shared, more and more healing, more and more healing. The Lord has brought couples to us that we've been able to minister to. We've met many new people as a result of this, people that have been on the same journey that we were on. We've met young women. We now serve, we typically do 2 retreats a year. We serve on a team. And there again, we were the first couple to actually serve on a team, I believe. And God knew why we were on that team. It's always amazing on all the Rachel's Vineyard retreats how he divinely aligns the participants. There were young women on that retreat that needed to see a godly man and a godly marriage. And that was the other thing that the retreat did for us, our marriage. The communication. Suddenly, the communication was far better. And it just built our marriage up, changed us. We're open now. So we also, Rick and I serve on the board of directors for New Heart of Texas. And we are enjoying that and know that that is where God has us right now in this stage of our life. I also volunteer 1 day a week at the Pregnancy Resource Medical Center in Rosenberg. Typically, it's a one-on-one with women that come in there with their crisis pregnancies. So that's been a wonderful experience for me, just to educate the women on the physical and emotional abuse physical and emotional pain that abortion can cause. So that's kind of where we are now. I'll just share briefly one young woman that was one of the most humbling experience in helping others. We had a woman that a young lady that went through our retreat, I think it was the 3rd retreat that we were on. And she was the age of our daughter, so we really bonded with her. And we just really not only bonded with her, but just connected with her. We could see our daughters in her. And she was in a very dark place. But she, like most that go through Rachel's Vineyard, got turned around. And to this day, we're there for her. A year after she went through Rachel's Vineyard, she found herself pregnant again, and she knew she didn't want to make that same mistake, so who did she call? She called Rick and I. She came over, we shared, we encouraged her, and we just celebrated her daughter's 1st-year birthday. So that's the kind of beauty that's coming from Rachel's Vineyard and from us sharing. So God's using that ugly part of my life to do beautiful things. And I am forever grateful for Dr. Burke, Teresa Burke, and for Mary Lee for your dream, and making all of this happen through Rachel's Vineyard and Grief to Grace. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And now I would like to introduce Kimmy Marino, and she's going to come up and share about her experience.
Hello. Good morning. I used to think that I could never stand in front of people and speak. I was terrified. But now it's just such an easy thing to do, to be up in front of people. I would say that probably most of my life, 2 words ruled: shame and anger. Boy, was I ever an angry person. Angry. And I didn't even know what I was angry about. My husband would come home and I would just tear into him. I mean, literally, I would be like inches from his face screaming at him, and he'd say, "What is wrong?" And then I'd scream back, I don't know. Because I truly did not know what I was so angry about. Just a little brief history on me. Before I got married, I grew up I'm the oldest of 6 children, and there's 4 other girls and a boy. And I grew up in a home where my father was alcoholic. He was a raging alcoholic. So, there was already anger present in my life. My mother, on the other hand, was the lunatic that, was crazy and would do all kind of awful things, sitting on him, beating his head in the floor and things like that. So, I didn't know which one was the more crazy person. So that was the environment that I grew up in. And when you grow up in that kind of environment and then you have all of these siblings, of course, everybody wants to compete for mama's attention. And so there was a lot of my mother doing her manipulation, so to speak, that she would pit one against the other. So there was always a lot of competition. Okay, so that's the backdrop there. I had an uncle that I dearly, dearly loved. And he was my godfather, and I just thought the world of him. And he always made me feel so special. Every time that he came around, he would tell me how pretty I was, and, how I was just so mature. And, I was just eating it up. I needed that attention. I craved that attention. And when I was just had turned 15, I don't know the conversation, but my perception has always been that my mother sent me to live with my uncle. He lived in another state. He was not married. And I thought this was great because, going to get out of that hellhole. And so I went over there to live, and it was only, I don't know, maybe the second night, he decided to climb in bed with me. And he proceeded to rape me. I didn't reject it because I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I just lay there and just thought that this is just what I had to do. And this continued multiple times, number of times over about 2 or 3 months. And then one day I found out that I must be pregnant. And I might also say that was my first introduction to sex. So and then previous to that, my other introductions to sex were my mother telling me, I just had sex with your daddy to shut him up. So in my mind, sex was a bad thing. It was a nasty thing. It was a dirty thing. It's just not good. And anyway, so he decided that, he had to keep his dirty little secret. And so I don't even remember what happened between me telling him that I was pregnant and being at the abortion clinic. But I can still tell you exactly what that abortion clinic looks like. It doesn't scare me today, but I remember everything about it. And I just remember laying on the table and hearing all these noises and then leaving there and just curled up in a ball in a fetal position on the floor of the car and crying, and he's yelling at me, "Shut up!" You know, of course, he didn't want to have to deal with any of that. I'm sure I didn't reason that at the time, but looking back on it now with, you know, my experience that I have in my life, I know that that's what it was. And I don't even know how I got home. I remember having a conversation with my mom that I wanted to come home. I never told my mom what happened. I came home. I went to school. I just tried to pretend like everything was fine, but it wasn't fine. And I still have today poems and writings that I wrote, and I looked at them recently, and they were pretty dark. So that shows you where I was. I kind of fumbled around in school. I didn't do very well. I was not a popular kid. You know, I got made fun of and things because, you know, I didn't at the time didn't have nobody to guide me, nobody to show me how to be a lady. And then I might also add, because of what happened to me, different women experience this in different ways. But for me, I ended up just being promiscuous and was, well, okay, you might as well open your legs for everybody because that's all they want, you know. So that's what I did. And I even made myself a list of all the guys I had been to bed with. I don't know why I made that list, but I made the list, and I could not throw it away. I mean, years and years went by, and I couldn't throw the list away. I don't know why, but it doesn't really matter now. But I just felt dirty. I felt like a piece of shit. I felt worthless. But to counteract that and to combat that, I had to be perfect. So my life was all about being perfect. I had to look perfect. You know, my hair does always look perfect. But, you know, that was to put that mask on so that no one would know the awful stuff that was behind there. I didn't talk about it with anybody. I did tell my husband before we got married, because somehow I had this idea in my mind that I was probably going to be punished and not be able to have children because of what happened. And I thought, this man needs to know this. And because if he really wants children, and maybe I might not be able to have any, he needs to know this so that he can make the decision whether he wants to ditch me or not. But he made the decision to marry me anyway. He said, "I love you, that doesn't matter." And I was only 19 years old when I met him and told him that. I never really thought much about that until later years, that how brave of a person I was, risking this relationship, this one guy that was totally different from any other guy I'd ever met. I mean, Lord, he had a Jesus statue on his dashboard. Who does that, you know? And I remember I would look at that little Jesus statue, and it never would fall over. It would just stay there, you know, and I thought, wow, you know. And I thought he was rich because they had Bluebell ice cream in their freezer. Hell, we only had Melorine, you know. That's like the fake stuff. So anyway, and his parents just embraced me and took me in the family and just made me feel so loved. And I never got any of that from my own family. And anyway, so here's all these years later, and I've had 2 children, living children. I have a son and a daughter. I have a couple of grandkids. And, you know, life's going along, and I'm just trying to be a good girl. I'm trying to get into church, and I did, and was very committed to my church, but not for the right reasons in the beginning. It kind of evolved to that. And then I came to a point in my life where my kids were growing up, and I was about empty nester, and like Chris said, I started thinking. And that's what I avoided for a lot of years. Don't think. Keep busy, because if you think, then you're going to start dredging up all this stuff. Not that I consciously, reasoned this in my head, but I had to keep busy because I needed to avoid thinking. I didn't want to think. Because for me, it was like if I started thinking, I would be able to finally say, yeah, you're that awful person. Yeah, you are screwed up. Yeah, you are worthless. Look at all this bad stuff you've done. Because as we know, when things like this happen in our life, we do things to try to protect ourselves, and a lot of time those things that we do are sinful things. They're things that we're doing that hurt other people. And I did a lot of hurting other people, mostly my husband. And I might also add, too, another huge element negative in our marriage was that I did not want to be intimate with him. Not just in a sexual way, and I didn't realize this until I went on my retreats, but intimacy is the opening up of yourself to another person. Not just in a sexual way, but just in communication and sharing. And it was hard for me to even talk to my husband about what was in my heart. That was the intimate thing. I didn't want to share that with him. I would share some things with other people, like a trusted girlfriend or something, but I would never tell him because I didn't want him to see that I was weak. At any rate, I went to talked to my priest. It was 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago this past December. Not about any of this stuff, but just about asking him to be my spiritual mentor. So I'm sitting in his office, and I don't even know what happened. The next thing you know, I'm saying, and she needs to pay. And I'm talking about my mother. And he said, you need to go on a Rachel's Vineyard retreat. And I said, well, I said, I know kind of basically that it's for women that have had abortions, but other than that, I don't know anything. And he said, I really urge you when you get home, look this up. And I did. And if you've ever looked up Rachel's Vineyards, there's all these different sites that have retreats. And for some reason, well, of course we know the reason, the Holy Spirit kept leading me back to New Heart of Texas. I'm Catholic, so it's like, okay, well, that's not a Catholic retreat, but I thought, you know what, it doesn't matter. It's a retreat. It's all the same. And so I ended up contacting Mary Lee, talked to her, just cried my eyes out, and talked to the facilitator that was going to be on my retreat, cried my eyes out, talked and talked and talked, because, you don't get to talk about this, and you're desperate to tell your story to somebody. And anyway, and I might add, I did eventually tell my mother 5 years ago, and I decided before I went on the retreat, I had also told both of my kids what had all happened to me. And anyway, so I went on the Rachel Vineyard retreat, and that was the most amazing retreat because I never could look at my abortion and the baby that resulted in that without tying it directly to the sexual abuse and the rapes, So it was all in one ball together. But when I went on that retreat, it was like the Holy Spirit allowed me to separate the baby from all of the stuff. And now I have a little baby in heaven, and her name's Hannah Elizabeth. And I don't ever think about her and associate it with all the bad stuff. So that's just been a huge miracle. Well, then I found out about Grief to Grace, and I thought, I need to go on that retreat. So I attended my Grief to Grace retreat last September, and it was life-changing for me. I didn't realize that I had so much anger still in me, and it was so wonderful to be in that environment, to be with other people that were on that retreat, that you didn't really have to say a lot. They knew exactly what you're talking about, with how that feels to experience that trauma. And it was just a beautiful way to work through all of that, and the program is designed that one builds on top of the other. And at the end of the retreat, I'm not going to say I walked out of there, just completely 100% healed, because we know that that's not true. What's true is that healing is a process, and it continues. But I got a big chunk of healing there. It allowed me to now step into some different areas in my marriage that I hadn't stepped into before. You know, I'm allowing my husband in little at the time, and things are getting better there, because I'm realizing, okay, this isn't as scary as I thought, you know, and all of that. But today, I just know that God is using me to tell the story and to reach. I want to reach all those ladies out there, all those men out there, anybody that's had this kind of trauma, and say, you don't have to hurt your whole life. There's a place you can go. I didn't know there was a place you can go and get healing and have redemption and be freed from all of this. And it's like heavy chains are gone. And I can't say enough about Dr. Burke's programs and how wonderful they are, and what a godsend and a lifesaver they have been in my life. And I will promote those till I don't have any way to speak about it anymore, because that's just been the most wonderful thing that has happened to me in my life. And it's allowed me to meet all these amazing people that I never would have met. I can't imagine not knowing any of the people I know today from these retreats. You know, Mary Lee and Dr. Burke and Tracy and Chris, and I see a number of other faces in here. I wouldn't know any of these people had I not gone on these retreats. But I'm going to say all of that also to say that it's allowed me to see that I really have lived such a blessed life, because God gave me things in my life as gifts to kind of counteract or to, you know, balance out. He gave me a voice to sing with, and I've been privileged to be able to sing in choir for 30 years, and I've gotten so much blessing from that, you know, given my voice to ministry. There's just a multitude of other things. So I have had an incredibly blessed life, and this has just been wonderful to be able to be at this segment of my life now and to take it forward and to reach those other people that are hurting. So thank you. Thank you.